Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is titled E-invoicing, the benefits of partnering with Avalara. We'll be with you for about 45 minutes today and really looking forward to sharing some information on this very, very exciting subject. So who's actually joining you today? Well, firstly, you're joined by myself. My name is Ruby Buckland, and I am a Senior Director leading our EMEA Partner Business Development Practice for Europe. And also I'm joined today by Alex Bolf, my colleague who is our leader for Global Indirect Tax. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ruby, and hello, everyone. Alex Bolf. I'm a Senior Director for Global Indirect Tax and E-invoicing. I'm also our product leader for our E-invoicing and live reporting solution. Great to be here with you today.
Thanks, Alex. So what are we actually covering today? Well, for the next 45 minutes, we're going to be taking a walk down the e-invoicing subject. And we're going to start by doing an introduction to e-invoicing, followed by a breakdown of existing and upcoming mandates. We'll then look at what the business impact is of these changes for end users and partners, and also then have an overview of the Avalara e-invoicing and live reporting solution. Lastly, we'll be talking about some of the ways that we partner with businesses and how we can help you in serving your customers. So before we go into the subject matter of today, let's just talk about who Avalara is for those of you that don't know. So Avalara was established in 2004, and we specialize in transactional taxes, providing fast, easy, and accurate ways to ensure that you remain compliant and top of all of your requirements in these areas, as well as, of course, reducing risk and streamlining all of your processes. A little bit more about the business. We currently cover 193 countries across all of our different products. We have 30,000 customers globally. We have 1,200 pre-built integrations, and these are growing daily. And last but not least, we have 22 offices across 4 continents. And in terms of what Avalara actually does, on the screen in front of you right now, you can see all the different products that we currently have in the market. And this also is growing all the time too. But at the moment, what you'll be able to see here is that we have an end-to-end suite of compliance for indirect tax. And that goes all the way from registration for indirect tax requirements such as VAT, GST, sales and use tax, through to product classification, and then the very important calculation, and more and why that's going to be more important as we move forward in the world of indirect taxes. We'll be talking about that more a little bit today. So within Avatax, which is our global tax engine, we cover sales and use tax, VAT, GST, customs duty as well. And then e-invoicing, which is obviously the focus of today's session. We're going into a lot of detail on this shortly. And last but not least, returns and reporting. So arguably, the thing that really most businesses are aspiring to, what they're actually submitting to the authorities, along with e-invoicing, which is going to move that to more real time. And just in terms of a few stats on some of these products, I'll just pick a couple. For calculation, in 2022, Avalara actually did 39.6 billion Avatax API calls. And those were made by our customers. And also another stat that I'll just bring out is that in 2022, Avalara processed and filed more than 5.2 million returns. So indirect tax really is our business, and we're seeking to manage that whole end-to-end journey within our own, within Avalara. So these are all products that we own, and we don't rely on any third parties for these. So moving through to subject 1 for today, introduction to e-invoicing. So we'll probably just start at the basics here to ensure that everybody's starting on the same place on the subject of e-invoicing. So this is a word that is being thrown around a lot at the moment. What exactly is e-invoicing? Well, let's start with an invoice. Everybody really knows what an invoice is, right? It is a document that we all know typically lists goods or services that are provided and lists the required payment and typically how you would pay that payment and by what date you need to pay it. So today for invoices, these are typically very unstructured. And what we mean by that is that it's using, free Word, Excel, or just saving and printing as a simple PDF. But what we're starting to see is a real move away from this. And the move away is very clearly from paper to digital. And that is where we switch to an e-invoice. And to be an e-invoice, you actually need to be a digital document, and that needs to be structured and machine readable. Now, typically, this is in two forms. It's either hybrid or structured. Now, a pure structured document is typically in an XML format. And a couple of examples you may see of this is a CII or a UBL. We also get hybrid documents. Now, these are really interesting because they can be read by machines and also people. So an example of this would be a PDF A3. And that differs from a normal PDF because it's actually embedded with XML. So it can be read, and it's also visible to a computer too. So visible to the human eye and also a computer. So Alex, are there any other examples that you could give, please, that we're seeing today in terms of hybrid for more specific mandates?
Yeah, absolutely, Ruby. So, as you said, XML in its purest form is to be read by a machine, and not all of us can read XML. You almost need a degree in computer science to really understand, who's issued the invoice, what's it for, what's the tax amount, and that's where this hybrid document comes in really, really handy, because it's as close to business as usual as you can get, because to the human eye, it's a PDF. It's something that is visual and what people are used to, but it has embedded XML in there, so it can still be received, interpreted, processed by a system. And we're starting to see this be deployed by tax authorities in France. They have the Factor-X invoice. That is a hybrid PDF, a PDF A3. That's going to be one of the acceptable invoice formats for the French mandate next year. We're going to talk about that in a bit more detail a bit later today. That invoice is actually also being used in Germany, the Zugford. So it's actually been developed by both the French and German authorities, and a great example of that PDF A3 in action. And moving towards the Middle East, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who is rolling out phase 2 of its Fatura e-invoicing mandates. While the main invoice format is XML, where a customer requests a human readable version, that must be the hybrid PDF A3 document. So we're already seeing this document in use. We're seeing it as a very common requested format, across those countries, and I think that will continue to grow.
Thanks, Alex. And we'll be digging a bit more into some of those countries, specifically France, later on in this webinar today. And, one thing it's worth pointing out, and that's a green arrow at the bottom here, is that this is all a shift away from manual processes to fully automated invoice processing, which can be difficult to put in place. Let's be honest about that. But the benefits that come with that are quite far reaching, both from an economical perspective, environmental perspective, and also, of course, being compliant. So let's actually just take a moment to talk about what is e-invoicing and what is live reporting. These are two terms that are being thrown around at the moment quite a lot. So firstly, starting with e-invoicing, we've already started to talk a little bit about that. What is e-invoicing? Well, sounds simple, but it's the exchange of e-invoices between different types of parties within a transaction. So typically between suppliers and their customers. They will then follow a very consistent structure, and that will be in the form of what the format of the document is and what the content is, and the way that the data is also formatted. And this typically will align with country requirements too, so can vary and will vary country by country. These are then sent via a platform, and this will be an open network like PEPL, and we'll touch on that more later, and via a government portal where it's mandated, or lastly, via a private EDI connection or email. And this is an example of a PDF A3 that we touched upon a moment ago. Then we've got live reporting, and this is the provision of tax and transactional data to the tax authority. So it's mandated that tax authorities need this information. Now, this can be part of the e-invoice issue, where when an e-invoice is issued, there'll be information that's stripped out and collected by the tax authorities at a granular level and then used as part of live reporting. Or it can also be a parallel process where invoices are sent, e-invoices or invoices, depending on whether there's a mandate for e-invoicing in that country. But in parallel, you also need to send very granular information to a tax authority. So Spanish SII is a very good example of this, where you need to submit information on a periodic basis to the tax authorities. That information is then reconciled to your VAT returns to ensure that they match. Now, this is very granular transactional level data, and what it actually gives the authorities the ability to do is review, approve, and validate information. So where it's part of a mandated invoice, they're actually putting themselves in the middle of the transaction. So they're seeing that invoice before the final customer what it does and actually approving the sending of it to the final customer. So they're the main differences between e-invoicing and live reporting. So I'm going to hand over to Alex now, who's going to talk a little bit about global digitalization trends in tax reporting. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Ruby. So yeah, no, that was a really good overview about what is an e-invoice, what is e-invoicing, what is live reporting, e-reporting, different variations on the same theme. This is such a key trend. It's the clear direction of travel for tax authorities and governments globally. And on the screen now, there's a really good diagram designed by PwC. This shows the rise of e-invoicing and e-reporting across the globe. So countries like Brazil, a lot of South American, Latin American countries implemented e-invoicing over the last decade. Every year, we've just seen this clear trajectory. More and more governments, more and more tax authorities start to introduce e-invoicing and then mandate it. And if you look at this graph, this chart, what we will see in the next few years is this won't fit on one page, because the number of countries doing this, it's almost every month. Every month there's a new consultation, there's new draft legislation. This is going to continue to accelerate. And why are governments doing this? Well, it's to reduce the VAT gap. It's to collect VAT that's not currently being collected due to fraud, at the kind of worst level, but also due to errors, due to transposition errors, due to failures to correctly charge tax at the right time. And they're using e-invoicing to do this, sharing granular transactional information with the tax authorities, moving away from a summary level of reporting through the traditional VAT return, and providing tax authorities with the ability to carry out checks and analytics on that invoice data. So sometimes that will be in real time, and we're going to look at some of the common models in a minute. But also, it's after the fact. Once they have all the details from every single invoice, every single transaction, that provides the tax authorities with rich granular data to carry out audits, to carry out analytics, exception reports. And we're even seeing this in Latin America, the use of AI, machine learning and artificial intelligence being deployed on this huge data lake that's being obtained by the tax authorities. So this will just continue to grow. Something that was very much a local issue over the last decade, the decade ahead, it really is a global issue. And one of the reasons this is going to continue to grow is it's backed from the very top. I've got a quote here from the OECD, and I think this quote really sums up why tax authorities want to deploy e-invoicing and live reporting. It's a win-win. Better detection of crime, higher revenue recovery, and synergies that can make tax compliance easier for both businesses and tax administrations. When I talk about this quote at conferences, I often do get a kind of wry smile from the audience, maybe a few chuckles, because is it really making it easier for businesses? There's obviously a recognition that there's a lot of transformation, change management that needs to occur. E-invoicing really does change existing business processes. It's a big change to most business, tax, finance functions within a company. However, once e-invoicing is deployed, the data is correct, the data is more granular, that actually does provide benefits. It does automate a lot of key tax and AP and AR processes. And ultimately, a lot of tax authorities want to move to a position where they will start pre-completing, pre-populating VAT and GST returns based on the data they receive. So moving away from this parallel process where you have invoicing for commercial and financial reasons, and then you have a periodic end of period VAT return process, VAT compliance. This aligns as one, and that alignment does bring synergies and business benefits. So why are governments introducing this? I've already touched upon this, the VAT gap. In the EU alone, this was estimated at the last count to be over 93 billion euros. Globally, if you extrapolate that, maybe looking at around $400 billion globally. So a big issue, and particularly in a post-pandemic environment, cash is key. Governments want to maximize tax revenue. They need this to help rebuild the economy. And the more governments and tax authorities that implement this, the more other governments are taking a look and saying, I want that too. I want to take a greater percentage of that tax take. I want to reduce fraud. I want to maximize the tax take. But it's also about efficiency too. And tax authorities are on their own digital and finance transformation journeys. The way they audit is changing. The way they hire is changing. They're starting to hire data scientists, people who are more tech savvy. They're investing in servers, the infrastructure. They're using the cloud. They are preparing to receive data in a structured format and data at scale, moving away from that summary VAT return, which put simply is too little too late. It doesn't provide the level of insights that tax authorities really need. And again, I mentioned this before, the future is real-time approval of e-invoices, and it's the deployment of analytics, AI and data analytics on that rich e-invoice data.
So Alex, kind of a thought on this, if that's okay. We do believe and understand that the VAT gap is a driver for the rise in mandates that we're seeing. Do you feel that it's been proven that where countries have introduced e-invoicing mandates, there has been a reduction in the VAT gap?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look to countries like Italy, so Italy was the first country within the European Union to mandate business-to-business e-invoicing. If you look at the stats in the first couple of years, not only does the tax take increase, but you actually see increases in national GDP, because suddenly parts of the economy that maybe the tax authority governments didn't have visibility on, maybe the kind of grayer sides of the economy, they're suddenly bought into the tax net. They're bought into the visibility of tax reporting through these mandates. So you can definitely see the improvements. You can see the results. And from a personal view, I've been an advisor to businesses before. I spent 18 years, as a consultant. A lot of these projects, a lot of these mandates really drive process, data, and system improvements. So it's the opportunity for businesses to prepare for e-invoicing, but also to improve the quality of their data. And that's going to lead to more accurate tax calculation decisions, more accurate tax reporting. So, reducing errors, reducing the need to make voluntary disclosures, getting it right first time. And I think everything that e-invoicing is trying to achieve leads to this. It's the idea that all the data that's submitted, it's structured, it's in a common format, it's a common standard. It can be audited automatically. And indeed, service providers like Avalara play a key role in that too, because the way we ingest that data is in a structured format. We can carry out validations and checks. So there is a line of defense before that invoice is even issued, before it's received by a tax authority.
Thanks, Alex. Very interesting. And obviously, we've talked a little bit about some mandates in the market. So let's dig a bit deeper into that. So let's have a look at some of the existing and upcoming mandates that we have in the market.
Thanks, Ruby.
Next
Yeah,
slide.
so I mentioned Brazil before. Brazil was the trailblazer for e-invoicing. And LATAM has really been the first region to really deploy e-invoicing live reporting at scale. Um, you know, Brazil, it's part and parcel of life. Every invoice that's issued, received, is reported to the tax authority. There's so much visibility. Even when goods move from one state to another, there is reporting. This has been deployed as well in virtually every single Latin American country: Argentina, Colombia, Mexico. The requirements do differ. There are different formats, different standards, different requirements around the software you have to use, whether you need to be an accredited provider. Some countries are starting to deploy QR codes, for example. But really, in that last decade, it's really only just been Latin America that's mandated e-invoicing at scale for business-to-business transactions. And where we've seen e-invoicing within Europe, it's tended to be more focused on public procurement, so business to government, businesses that have contracts with government departments. So, over the last 3 years, the European Union has mandated government departments in every single EU member state to be in a position to receive e-invoices that meet the European e-invoicing standard. There is a directive on that. But then we've seen a handful of member states start mandating B2G e-invoicing. But apart from Italy in 2019, really the only other e-invoicing apart from B2G has been in the form of live reporting or e-reporting. And we've seen a kind of myriad of different compliance requirements. So the Spanish SII reporting invoice level data every 4 days. In Hungary, real-time reporting. So there's no requirement in Hungary to issue an e-invoice. It can still be paper. It can still be an unstructured PDF. But every time that invoice is generated, the invoice data needs to be submitted to the Hungarian tax authority. And it's really just in the last 12 months that we've seen this e-invoicing explosion. We've seen across EU member states more and more mandates for business to government. So, for example, Belgium and Luxembourg. But we've also seen more European countries mandate e-invoicing. So Serbia, from January this year, we've started to see pilot programs, new platforms being developed by EU member states. And next year is the big year, the big catalyst year, the game changer. Next year, we have France, Poland, Spain, possibly Belgium, all mandating e-invoicing between businesses. That is going to impact roughly 10 million businesses in Europe. It's a huge, huge deal. It's a big transformation moment. And other countries will follow too. We have currently a draft directive, VIDA, VAT in the Digital Age. This is removing or aims to remove a lot of the obstacles, the barriers that prevent businesses from adopting e-invoicing on a voluntary basis. But it's also to make it easier for EU member states to mandate e-invoicing. The crescendo, the finishing line is 2028, where there's a proposal that all cross-border e-invoicing, so intra-community sales and purchases, will all be subject to real-time reporting, live reporting of that transactional data to tax authorities in a revamped VISE system. And that will be underpinned by mandatory e-invoicing. But as I said, that's really the finishing line. It's not the starting gun. The starting gun is now. And, it's our view that between now and 2028, virtually every single EU member state will implement e-invoicing. And there is a dozen other member states that are at different phases of that implementation, including Germany, who have submitted a request to the European Union for a derogation, permission to mandate B2B e-invoicing, and that's likely to be as early as January 2025. So, suddenly over half of European GDP will be covered by an e-invoicing mandate in the next 18 months.
So Alex, this is fascinating. I love this slide. And actually, whenever we show it, everybody gets their cameras out and takes a photo. So I always like to caveat this slide and say, this is always changing. Actually, staying on top of this is a full-time job for many people at Avalara. So, so much information in this slide. And I think it's just worth taking a moment on two regions that we've not really touched on yet, which is Asia Pac, right? So for ASPAC, we've seen quite a few countries introduce mandates in 2023. We're seeing a rise in that region, which I think is worth noting on this call. But also the US, right? They're currently in a pilot period, aren't they, with the option to do e-invoicing on a voluntary basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So this really isn't just a LATAM and European issue. We're seeing this spread to every corner of the globe. So your first question about APAC, absolutely. We're seeing a number of countries in the region either mandate e-invoicing or seriously promote its use. So you mentioned the PEPL network. That was originally set up as a European initiative to support public procurement, business to government transactions. There's about 750,000 businesses and government departments on that network today. That will probably grow to closer to 1 million later this year. But a lot of APAC countries like Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Japan, they've jumped on the PEPL train, and they've provided a national, local standard to be used on that network. And promoting its use. So in Australia, this isn't tax driven, but it's still being encouraged by the ATO, the Australian Tax Office. And to incentivize businesses, in Australia, if you have a contract with a government department and you issue the invoice electronically via PEPL, there is a commitment to pay that invoice within 5 days. And interest will be paid if it's not made in that period. In Singapore, we're actually seeing government grants, actual dollars being paid to adopt e-invoicing. Again, not tax driven, but just a recognition that it aids with digitalization of the economy and there are real business benefits. We're also seeing, more mandates, across APAC. In China, there's been a number of different pilots at a regional level as they've rolled out the e-FAPIO. We are seeing new mandates in the Philippines. Malaysia intends to introduce e-invoicing starting later this year. And then you mentioned the US, and that's really, really interesting because the US is a bit different from a indirect tax perspective because there isn't a single federal VAT. We have tax at a state and local level. There are over 10,000 different tax and jurisdictions in the US. So that makes it very difficult for tax to be the driver. There isn't one kind of indirect tax authority that can really take the lead. So instead, we've seen the emergence of a national e-invoicing standard and a national digital highway. So originally, this was a pilot run in conjunction with the Federal Reserve Banks and the BPC, the Business Payments Coalition. This has now moved from a pilot stage to a go-live network. So we've seen the establishment of something called the Digital Business Networks Alliance. Avalara is going to be a founding member of this body. I've actually just joined the interim board of directors. And it's very exciting because the US has always had e-invoicing, but at a very divergent level. There's been so many different private networks, procurement networks. It's been almost the power of multinationals saying, send me this format, join this procurement network. What we're seeing with this DB&A digital highway is a common standard that can be implemented by ERP systems, service providers, businesses. And it will be a four-corner model, very much like PEPL. It will be built on XML standards using UBL, Universal Business Language, and is there to increase efficiency, move away from paper, move away from standard PDFs, hopefully accelerate payment times, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. So again, this is happening everywhere. Sometimes it's mandated, sometimes it's voluntary, sometimes it's incentivized. But it really is a global issue now that businesses really need to take seriously. ERPs, business platforms, payment service providers. It's something that you can't ignore.
Thanks, Alex. Interesting and a lot to watch this space on, I guess. I'm mindful of time to make sure that we stick to the 45 minutes that we've promised for this webinar. So let's now spend a few minutes on the models. Now, the next slide here shows some of the models. You talked about the four-corner model. There's some more models. And, that's what does keep this quite complicated, because different countries are choosing different models for their mandates. So let's take a few minutes to look at this, and then perhaps we can then move into some examples of some of the big countries coming through in 2024.
Absolutely. So completely, there is no single model around the globe. There are different workflows. There are different orders of the e-invoicing process and the data submission. So PEPL is underpinned by a four-corner model. It's based on interoperability. The idea that having a common network with a common standard. There's no single government platform to connect to. You connect to a service provider who is certified. That service provider ensures the data, the invoice they receive, meets the local requirements, so can convert it to the relevant standard. That service provider, in effect, has a key to the network and will share that invoice to your trading partner, to your counterparty via their service provider. And then that service provider will receive the invoice and pass it back. So no roaming fees. It doesn't matter if your customer or your vendor, your supplier, uses a different accredited service provider. You're not forced to join a procurement network, one of the legacy AP networks. This is open. It's an open network. You're free to choose and change your provider, and it doesn't have to be the same provider as your trading partner. So it really is an open network. It's built on this concept of four corners, and it will continue to spread. I've already mentioned this is being used across the EU for public procurement. Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Japan is actually using PEPL as a way of compliantly meeting the new tax qualified invoice requirements that kick in from October this year. So certainly something to look for. And as more and more businesses grow, you'll see this network effect. I said 750 today. That will move to closer to 1 million by the end of this year, and that will continue to grow. We then have models like Hungary, which I've already mentioned, real-time reporting. There isn't actually always an e-invoice, but we're seeing the reporting of a subset of that invoice data to the tax authority. So in Hungary, that's in real time. In some other countries, it's more periodic e-reporting. And then we have live VAT reporting clearance models, where before that invoice is actually issued to the customer, to your counterparty, it needs to be shared with the tax authority. And they review it, they approve it. In some countries, they're digitally signing it. They may be adding a QR code. They may be adding a unique identification number. In effect, making that invoice legal, giving you the green light to send it on. And some tax authorities then go a step further. In a more centralized model, the tax authority is sitting in the middle between the supplier and the customer. And the way the customer, the business, retrieves that invoice is via that government platform. So that's how it works in Italy, via the STOA platform. It's how this will work in Poland next year under the new KSEF e-invoicing mandates. That's quite interesting because the standard there is XML. So every business is required to generate a compliant Polish XML invoice. And that's then sent to the government platform, the KSEF platform. And the platform itself takes that XML, converts it into a human readable PDF. And that PDF is in Polish. And suddenly in Poland next year, every single invoice looks the same. And the way the the customer obtains that invoice is through the portal, either manually logging in, viewing the invoice list, downloading that in the format you want, or through a service provider who will be able to automate reaching out, retrieving those invoices, and bringing them back into your system. And then finally, a kind of future state model. This is often seen as a kind of CTC 5 or 6 corner model. It's looking at leveraging 4 corner models like PEPL, putting the tax authority in the middle. This is what Belgium's proposed mandate may look like. It's actually what France's mandate next year may end up like, because there's currently a PEPL proof of concept at the moment, trying to get the candidate PDPs, the certified e-invoicing providers, to link together using the PEPL network and using a special PEPL directory. So, very much future looking, but this model could play a very key part under VIDA, VAT in the digital age. So I mentioned 2024 being the big transformational year, the game changer for e-invoicing in the EU. So at the moment, July is the big month in 2024. We're seeing new mandates in France, Spain, and Poland. This affects businesses, business-to-business transactions. In France, the headline is the sending of e-invoices is limited to the largest businesses, the enterprise level companies. But in reality, every business needs to be in a position to receive an electronic invoice from the 1st of July, because every business will have large suppliers, different vendors within its ecosystem. There's also new requirements on the e-reporting of certain data around business to consumer sales, but also cross-border and payment data. So a big impact there that's going to impact over 4 million businesses in France. Very similar in Spain. We have less detail. The legislation isn't as final as France. We're still waiting for full technical details. There's been a public consultation. So this could slightly be delayed, or what the model looks like could change, but certainly something to still prepare for. And then Poland, as I mentioned, the KSEF platform can actually be used today voluntarily. You can already test against it. But this, again, is a big change, and all invoices will need to meet this new local Polish XML standard, and all invoices will need to go to and be retrieved from the KSEF platform. So what does this mean to businesses? It's really a big change to how they do business, how they interact with trading partners, how they not only issue invoices to their customers, but how they receive invoices from their suppliers, from their vendors. And what this looks like is a merging of business processes and tax compliance. They're no longer 2 distinct processes. So I like to think this is a continuous compliance cycle, something that's happening almost every second of the day, every day of the year. So businesses need to be prepared for submitting compliant e-invoices, meeting local standards, being able to send them to the relevant portal, the relevant platform, the relevant network, being able to digitally sign, add a QR code, meeting very local requirements, but also being in the position to receive those very same compliant e-invoices from vendors. This has an impact on procurement processes, individual arrangements with suppliers. Maybe you use a procurement network today. Maybe you have certain portals you use with certain customers or certain suppliers. Under e-invoicing mandates, that may need to change. It's really a big impact to traditional financial and procurement processes, but then a big impact in relation to how VAT, GST returns are prepared. So suddenly we're moving to this granular level of data, of detail in a return. That invoice data becomes the single source of truth. It's already being shared with a tax authority. So we're going to suddenly see more focus on reconciliation from e-invoice data to the data in a return. But it's the full life cycle that needs to be thought of. And this is continuous every day. because under e-invoicing, there is greater focus on archiving, being able to demonstrate the authenticity of the sender and the integrity of that invoice data that needs to be stored typically for an entire decade. So a big, big change, and a change that's really underpinned by the quality and granularity of that data that you store in your business systems.
I think, Alex, there's some real opportunities here for the tax function and finance functions, because it's helping to get tax and finance more, especially tax, right, to the top of the boardroom agenda. So for those businesses that have been struggling to get budget to automate or look at their tax calc strategy, tax calculation, that is, and determination, this allows them really to have a hook to hang that on. And I've met with many businesses that really are taking the bull by the horns here and trying to automate as much as they can in readiness for this continuous compliance cycle. So I think it looks a little bit scary on the face of it. My goodness, you've got to get it right first time, but there's also opportunities here. And I think certainly individuals that I've talked to in the tax function are really beginning to think like this. And actually, how do they become a stakeholder to the business? And how do they actually work with the C-suite to actually bring home the relevance of this and how perhaps processes will need to change?
Absolutely. And it goes back to that idea of win-win. Once this is embedded, once it becomes a standard business process, you have the data, you're meeting these requirements, there'll be natural synergies and benefits for the business, for the finance function, for the procurement function, for the tax function. There's a lot of change here. There's a lot of things to track. It can seem quite scary, but that's why businesses need to partner. They need to partner with their ERPs, e-commerce, EPOS partners, but then those businesses need to partner with a trusted e-invoice provider too.
Thanks, Alex. I think that neatly goes to our next section, which is Avalara E-invoicing live reporting. What do we do in this area? And I know that you've recently taken over this product, Alex. I think it'd be really good to get your input on that.
Thanks, Ruby. Yeah, so we're really excited about our involvement within e-invoicing. 2 years ago, Avalara acquired Imposia in Germany, a leading e-invoicing and EDI company. What we've been doing is taken that expertise, experience, the core product functionality, but building that product into the Avalara compliance cloud. So something that is global, seamless in terms of integration, a single solution, a single integration, a single API, and something that will scale, as more and more countries across the globe implement e-invoicing. Historically, businesses, ERP providers, they've often gone for local solutions. And that's because historically it was a local issue. It was an individual country compliance requirement someone had to meet. It was often delegated down to a local country manager, at a subsidiary level. But with the pace and scale of e-invoicing today, that approach is no longer sustainable. Business platforms, they need a single global solution. They need to look at this strategically. So, we have designed a solution that is not only single and global, but it has a global API. So regardless of the country mandate, there is one way to connect. And we've built that global API on a universal standard, universal business language. So there is already a common global data dictionary for businesses to know and understand and build to. Gone are the days of saying, this is a template. These are the fields we use. This is now being built on a global standard, something that's global, something that's scalable. So Avalara e-invoicing and live reporting can connect to any billing platform, ERP, through an API. We're system agnostic. We're country agnostic because the data that comes in is then mapped to our own instruct format. We convert that data to meet the relevant requirements based on the country mandate. So the relevant format, is it a PDF A3? Is it an XML? Is it a local variation? Is it UBL? Is it CII? Doesn't need to be digitally signed. What are the standards that need to be met? What's the structure? Do we need a QR code? Where do we send that invoice? Do we send it to a network? Do we send it to the government? Is that pre or post issuing the invoice? We have pre-built country mandate workflows to meet all of those diverse requirements. So all the business or the platform needs to worry about is sending the right data at the right time. And then our solution takes care of the rest. As well as sending the invoice to the tax authority, we also receive it. We bring back invoices on the receipt side from a network, from a government platform, and pass that back again through a single API to the business, to the system. So really this interacts as part of business as usual. It's behind the scenes to provide a way to have compliance e-invoicing. We also have a monitoring system, so businesses can view the status of invoices issued and received, were there any errors, being able to identify the actual error message, being able to view the invoices that have been issued and received, as well as viewing those in the different formats that are available, and that may include a human readable version too. We also have dashboards to show analytics, showing an overview, a whole holistic view of invoicing, and that can be split by company, by country, so can easily be deployed in a center of excellence, a shared service center, or be used by a global tax function.
Thanks, Alex. So a lot of information there. So as I try to kind of summarize this and get us to the end of this webinar, what I will say is this is webinar 1 of a series. So I know we've covered a lot of subjects that may be new, but we will be going more granular on some of those areas. So please do look out for the other parts of this series that will follow. But as we reach the end, and as I start to cover how we can partner together and what Avalara's approach is on this, I just want to summarize some of the key things that we've heard today. So what I'm going to start with is, why is it important to act now? Well, as you've hopefully seen through our very quick tour of what's happened in the past and what's forthcoming, mandatory e-invoicing is very much expected to spread to more countries. It's scheduled to, there's more mandates coming, and honestly, we think it will soon be looking at who isn't introducing e-invoicing rather than actually tracking the ones that are. So it's growing, and that's a fact. 2024 is a big year, and Avalara very much is getting ready for that, as well as a lot of our customers and partners. And the main other bullet to think about is, mandatory e-invoicing really is going to make paper and PDF invoices non-compliant. So what we're going to end up with is the fact that you could effectively not be able to conduct business in a given country if you're not compliant and aligning with e-invoicing. And there'll be other operational obstacles as well. So it could stop business for you in a country where you're currently operating or looking to move into. And last but not least, we're seeing these be launched thick and fast. So they can occur at any time. Typically, you do have notice. So I don't want to be scaremongering here, but effectively, we have seen some short turnarounds or information related to a mandate change a little bit last minute with schemas being changed. For instance, I think it's Poland is already on iteration 2 of their schema, which is coming out in 2024. That's likely to change again before then. And as a result, businesses are expected to be ready. Their platforms and financial systems are expected to be ready. And software providers, be it ERPs, bidding platforms, marketplaces, customers will be expecting them to also be ready to support them in their business activities so they're uninterrupted. So it's just thinking about all those elements and why it's important to act now. Another key stat, I'm not sure if Alex has already mentioned it, but in 2024, we do expect 45% of GDP in Europe to actually be covered by an e-invoicing mandate. So that's looking at all the information we've got available and deducing what coverage we think that will be. So it's a very, very high number. So just thinking about some of the complexity, again, summarizing what we've actually heard, providers of finance and accounting platforms and ERPs need to actually make sure that they're able to support their customers and they're future-proof for that. Businesses want to continue trading, ensure continuity and that they're compliant for tax. And accounting and consulting firms, let's touch on that for a moment. They're going to be expected to do vendor selection, help businesses actually with readiness of data, with implementation and testing. So there's a part to play, in a number of areas for this, for e-invoicing. And something to think about is, Avalara can obviously help with one way to comply, but thinking about some of the complexities that are shown on the right-hand side, formats are different per country, standards and schemas, the APIs and endpoints that the countries require vary, as well as many other things like, do they need a digital signature? Do they need a QR code? Do you need an address directory? So these are some of the things that we're having to look at country by country. So very, very complicated. So just think of a vendor or a partner that can help you achieve that. So it's effectively, well, there's a new mandate coming, let's switch that on. Let's switch that on for our end customers. That's really what you should be hoping to achieve. So just to finish off our session today, how can Avalara partner with you? So there are different ways that we partner today in the market with our different buckets of partners. So be you a technology partner, an accounting or consultant, or a system integrator. So firstly, you can refer Avalara solutions. Typically where that happens, we will give you a commission for referring customers to us so that we can actually provide our end solutions to meet their requirements and their needs. No certification would be required for you as a partner on this. You could just enter into a program with us where you refer your customers to us where they need our solutions and we give you commission in return. Option 2 is actually implementing our solutions. So you could actually get certified through the programs that we have on not just the invoicing, but a range of all our products to actually become a certified implementer so that where you spot a need for your end customer or client, you're actually able to come in and certify yourself and then implement e-invoicing, for example, for your end users. Number 3, this is becoming quite popular, embedding and bundling our solutions into your own environment so that you're actually able to offer a bundled price to the end user. There's obviously a build needed on your side to be able to do this, but this is an area that is proving quite popular for e-invoicing and one that we're able to explore with you. And last but not least is to actually develop certifications for your own platform so that you're able to send data to our global API so that we can just feed that into the e-invoicing mandates as required. Certification would also be required for this. We'd work with you to assist you. So we've got a partner launch team that can assist you through that build. And we've also got a sales team that could then help you to actually receive revenue share of any referrals that you send to us for your end users that actually want to use the integration that you've built. So 4 different ways in which we typically partner for e-invoicing, and we would be very happy to discuss any of those with you. Should anything you've heard today resonate with you and you understand that you've got a need in this area. So I know we're running to time here, but I wanted to pause to see if there are any questions that we can take based on what we've heard today. So just opening up for questions, and we'll also have a look at any questions that have come through during the course of the webinar today.
Ruby, I've just seen one question come in, and it's lots of countries mentioned, lots of European ones. What about the UK? Is the UK mandating e-invoicing? I think that's a very good question because the UK really does stand out. It's not really, on that timeline that I showed. At the moment, there's limited mandates in the UK for e-invoicing. We have a requirement if you do business with the NHS England, for example. There is a requirement to submit e-invoices, and there's a number of different ways of doing that. We have Making Tax Digital, which isn't really live reporting. It's just the way the 9-box VAT return is submitted. At the moment, the position is there is no clear roadmap for mandatory e-invoicing in the UK. I think it's something, the Treasury, HMRC are probably monitoring. VAT in the digital age will, at the moment, on the face of it, impact some businesses in Northern Ireland. So the UK still has to be part of that discussion, and it will impact British businesses. But I think even if there isn't an immediate mandate in the UK businesses do need to look further afield, look at what's happening globally, where they do business, where they have subsidiaries, how are they impacted. Exactly the same for the US. Yes, there's an opportunity now to join the Digital Business Network Alliance, B2B Digital Highway, for e-invoicing between businesses. but also it's looking further afield. It's looking at, where you have operations, where you have subsidiaries, where you do business. How is that going to impact you? Where do you need to be compliant?
Thanks everyone for your time today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for more questions. However, we will stay on the chat box to answer any that haven't been answered during the course of this webinar. So I guess what's left for me to do now is to thank Alex for your time. Thank you so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure having you join me today.
Thanks, Rebe. Absolute pleasure to be here. And thanks everyone for joining us today.
And just in terms of next steps, you'll see that there's some resources that you have access to. You should see that on your screen right now. There's some flyers and data sheets that you might find useful. You've also got an email if you would like to get in touch with us based on what you've heard today. So that's showing on the screen right now. And last but not least, you have got Alex and my details as well, should you wish to reach out to either of us. We have got some more webinars coming in this series, so please do keep an eye out for those. And Alex and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much and goodbye.